What do you think the Ukrainians can do to support Europe and its striving for strategic autonomy? Do you think the idea of NATO minus is possible? The idea that NATO could exist without the United States?
Well, for 5 years, it's been absorbing Russian pressure that hasn't been directed at the rest of Europe. It has been learning and showing Europe what war in the 21st century is likely to be like. It has been the bulwark of democracies in Eastern Europe. And I think the Baltics, the Poles, the Scandinavians in particular realise that. Even in the Cold War, Sweden and Finland didn't join NATO. They have now. They understand they're all in this together. Supporting Ukraine is important to them, but learning from Ukraine is just as important.
This is The Global Gambit.
Welcome back, everyone, to part two. Cheeky cliffhanger I left you on. We're back with General Mick Ryan, retired Major General in the Australian Army. Part one, we were talking about the Iran war and some of the elements, and we left it on the notion of, this grand strategic vision and plan that the Trump administration, or just Trump himself, because he's obviously a single-handed man who can handle everything, to take on China. And to do that, you obviously incapacitate or decapitate the likes of Venezuela, Iran, and others. But it doesn't seem quite like that. And Mick, you mentioned at the end of part one that you've been just returned from a trip to Taiwan. And we've seen some interesting developments in the past few weeks regarding Taiwan. The opposition leader, I think of the KLM, was in China for the first time in a long time. And we've obviously seen an important election recently in Japan. And generally, there seems to be quite a shift. The Europeans have been engaging the Chinese more. There is this big upcoming, supposedly Trump-Xi meeting this month. Can you take me through a little bit more what you saw in Taipei and just the Sino influence in this sort of sphere of the world right now?
Yeah, so it was the leader of the KMT, which is actually the party that established modern Taiwan.
Yeah.
She visited Beijing, met with President Xi Jinping. Clearly a very significant propaganda win for the Chinese Communist Party, who can now say, hey, this proportion of Taiwanese agree with us that we should absorb Taiwan into the People's Republic of China, even though Taiwan has never been part of the People's Republic of China. But the reality is even the KMT is split. It's not unified behind an idea of being part of China in any way whatsoever. There's a small proportion that are very pro-China and probably use Chinese messaging, but there's a whole lot that are pro getting on better with China, but not being part of China. So even the leader of KMT is managing factions within her party. Unfortunately, however, they have enough power in the legislature to get in the way of the special defence budget, and the bits they're getting in the way of are those things that really need to transform the Taiwanese military with drones, drone manufacturing capability, a whole range of long-range strike weapons that they'll buy from the Americans and build themselves. So and with that, the president of Taiwan can't say to the Americans, I'm doing everything I can, because he can't get through his defense budget. So he has a bunch of American congressmen and senators coming through, wagging their fingers at him, saying, well, how can we support you if you can't even get a budget passed? I can understand that, but hey, this is how democracies work. You can't criticise people for being democracies. So, it's a really interesting political environment there. A fascinating, prosperous, vibrant democracy, a young democracy like Ukraine, and all democracies are worth defending and preserving. And in many respects, I think part of the reason is these young, vibrant democracies can reinvigorate the old, boring, dull democracies who are full of people who don't understand why they should be defended anymore.
Yeah, it's interesting. We had one of the head researchers at the Economist Intelligence Unit, which is sort of like the nerdy branch of the Economist group, a couple of weeks ago, the day after the Hungarian election, which was obviously a big win for not just European unity, but democracy more broadly. Because it seems to be, and I obviously say this cautiously, but it seems like there is a certain resilience or demonstration of democratic re-democratization which is occurring. And to your point about Taiwan and Ukraine, they're obviously very close. I urge caution on sort of, that sort of what we've seen in Ukraine means China's immediately going to do what it is over Taiwan. It's a very different military theatre. What's your assessment of sort of attitudes towards democracy amongst different countries in Asia right now, and how China is trying to undermine them. Of course, Taiwan's the most, I think, fierce pro-democracy entity in the Southern East Asian theatre right now. And how do you think that that's playing?
I think Republic of Korea, South Korea, also a pretty vibrant democracy. Although, when you become president, you're almost guaranteed to go to jail afterwards at the moment. But, Japan, I think, is a very vibrant democracy and has been a good citizen since the end of the Second World War. And the recently re-elected Prime Minister of Japan, who's currently in Australia, I think is, revolutionising Japan's national security policy and strategy. And, I think you have other younger democracies like, Singapore, like Indonesia. They're democracies of a different form to, say, the United States or the Westminster model, but they are democracies. And, people are engaged in the elections, in electioneering, these kind of things. And there's an energy and a vibe there in these new young Asian democracies that we should be watching and going, wow, they're engaged. They understand that freedom is a real thing. It's not some abstract that people throw rocks at on university campuses in white English-speaking democracies. It's a real thing they believe in. It's something they fought for and something they vote for now.
Yeah, very, very pertinent words. I guess one last question before we turn more explicitly to Ukraine, but there's a lot of debate over China's military capabilities. The Navy is bigger than America's, but size doesn't necessarily mean effectiveness. And there's also a deliberation over what China really wants. Do they want to be a status quo power? Do they actually want to assert the, the United States? Do they just want to be a regional hegemon? There's plenty of different theories. I'm not going to go into all of that too much. But what is your assessment of that? When China's looking at both the field in Iran, as we touched on, but also the war in Ukraine, what do you think it wants? What does she want?
Well, I think if you look at a contemporary China, it's already a regional hegemon. If you take into account its economic power, its military power, its intelligence power, which people overlook at their peril. Its build-up in its intelligence agencies has been just as extraordinary as the build-up in its military power, and its ability to steal the secrets of other countries is unprecedented in human history. It has cultural and diplomatic power throughout the region and increasingly throughout the world. So it's already a regional hegemon. I mean, Xi has these timelines, 2027, 2035, 2049. These are deeply felt. He believes the Chinese system is a better system and one that can compete with democracies around the world, which is why he's going through all these purges. There's a great article just come out in Foreign Affairs that talks about why is he doing all these purges. And it's not just payback and stuff. It's about a governing system that can compete with democratic governing systems. It's a fascinating article and well worth a read, I think. Xi wants to be at least the equal of the United States, at least. And I think if he could, he would love to be the preeminent nation in the world. I don't think he's going to pull that off. He has a range of challenges that are also unprecedented in human history. I mean, the one-child policy will result in a massive democratic slump in China. It will be half its current population by the end of this century, at least, and potentially worse. It currently has a military almost exclusively comprised of only children. We have not seen that in the entirety of human history. There is no precedent for it, and Chinese society's views of losing only children means that every death results in 6 people that now do not have a provider for them. The gross pollution of arable land in China over the last 70 years has seen about a quarter of arable land destroyed forever with heavy metals and other pollution. So they have all these really fundamental problems, and, they run out of their social security safety net very soon as well. So 99% of Xi's problems are domestic. So he is constantly running just to keep up with domestic challenges, but he still has time for the foreign stuff, and he would like to see China as the preeminent nation in the world. I'm not convinced he'll get there.
Very interesting. I wasn't aware of the military, should we say, composition. As a demographer by trade, one of the things that I've really been appreciative of is the demographic dividend that countries can benefit from, and certainly China has benefited from that most of all in the past 20 years. We're beginning to see that come to a head now as the population experienced its first actual decline in 2023. Yep. India overtook it. So when we look at the demographic imbalance of the population pyramid within the country, what does that mean for the political choices that the CCP has for Xi to make? And therefore, how does that bleed into strategic decision-making for military maneuvers? Because it seems to me like they try to undertake certain military activity sometimes to stoke nationalism, much like we saw with dictators in Latin America or something, Pinochet or something. They will undertake certain moves as a way to distract domestic populations from internal issues at home by stoking this, by saying we will rekindle national rejuvenation, Taiwan will be reincorporated, all this sort of rhetoric. How do you see it?
Well, I think Xi's obviously his number one preoccupation, his highest priority always is preserving the power of the Chinese Communist Party. That will always be number one. Closely followed by economic growth. I mean, he has to somehow keep the Chinese economy growing and be able to support all these people. There's increasing evidence that he's not going to be able to do that forever. I mean, economic growth has come down out of double digits. It's been out of double digits for some time now. It may be approaching a period of stagflation like we saw in Japan for many, many years. That will be a really big problem for him socially because all of a sudden he has a lot of people who are out of work. You have an ageing population that don't have as many providers for them. So, those demography trees that you demographers all produce that are very useful because they can give a snapshot of the health of a country. You see this bubble that's just rising up, from the 50-year and above, and a real concave impact in the 50-year and below cohorts. That's not healthy for any country. And we're approaching, once again, another unprecedented period where a lot of countries have this bubble of old people and a declining cohort, and as a percentage of their overall population of younger people who are the most productive in their working life, but also most productive demographically, sustaining and building your population. So China has a pretty big problem, but it's also a problem that Russia, Japan, and many other Western countries have as well.
No, it is, of course. It's not exclusive to China, but I think because of the gender imbalance is what makes it. The economic dependency that a lot of Eastern European countries, including Ukraine, which we'll turn to, is experiencing for the working population of 16 to 64-year-olds, right? In a healthy country, that's not too pressure because you've got that proportion can provide enough income to support the public services for education of the younger population and social security and healthcare for the older. But South Korea is the biggest illustration of this. You see the working population squeezed to such an extent, because you've got aging population, people want less children, women want to focus on their careers, lots of different elements. But you're seeing that in China, as you said, it's one of the fastest growing in terms of wealth as well. So I just wonder how that bleeds into the military and China's ability to exercise its foreign policy.
Yeah. Well, I mean, what you're talking about is the dependency ratio, which demographers, it's the ratio of working people to those who are being supported in welfare or whatever. And a healthy one is, 4 or 5 to 1. A lot of countries are now 2 to 3 to 1. And the problem with China, as you said, is a large proportion of families are only child families. They don't have that social safety net from the government that a lot of other countries have. So the social safety net is that one child supporting 2 parents and 4 grandparents. If that one child gets mobilised and goes off to war and dies, you're compounding your dependency ratio with every single death. And I think this is something that might rein Xi in, potentially. We don't know. We've never seen it in history, so we don't know. But when every single military person you send offshore is an only child, that would have to place some kind of limitation on Xi's freedom of manoeuvre, because societally, how many individuals can he afford to lose who are also supporting 6 other people?
Absolutely fascinating. I mean, I could continue this indefinitely with you, Mick, but we have limited time left, and I do want to touch on Ukraine very briefly. But one country that is facing its own economic catastrophe and dependency ratio intensifying is Russia. The economy looks absolutely bleak. Putin is bunking down in his bunker, hiding away from Ukrainian drones. What's your assessment of the Russian military campaign right now versus the Ukrainians?
Oh, I published a piece about this not long ago. In short, not good. And, I say that with a big, broad smile on my face. Every Russian failure is to be celebrated. At the end of the day, I think last year we saw the Russians, learning and adapting pretty well. And I've talked to frontline brigade commanders, many of them were thinking that the Russians might have been just ahead of the Ukrainians in drone operations and tactics and stuff. That seems to have flipped in the last few months. I think there's a whole range of reasons for that. I think a new defence minister who's young and energetic, tech savvy, the Ukrainians with the Magyar in charge of USF, I think his reforms are starting to really bite, improving the consistency and efficiency of drone operations. They've really invested in defensive operations and in a whole range of things. And you see a strategic objective from Zelensky, Fedorov and others saying we need to kill far more Russians. It's like, yes, you do. And they're achieving that. They're killing, on average, 5,000 or 10,000 more per month than they were this time last year. They're killing more than the Russians can really replace without a full-scale national mobilisation. And we're seeing it, have real impacts, like the Russians are going backwards in territory that they're taking or holding. We haven't seen that so far in this war, not for a long time. Ukrainian military efficiency has improved this year. It's having a measurable impact on the Russian spring offensive, which just has not gathered momentum. It's got some tempo, but nothing like what it's done in previous years. I think Putin is seeing his narrative around inevitable victory being blown away by the performance of the Russian military over the last few months. I mean, even a serious MAGA supporter couldn't buy into Putin's inevitable victory narrative now. There's just no evidence of it. And to make it worse, the Ukrainian long-range strike campaign has got better, it's got bigger and got more effective. And you're now seeing Putin begging for a ceasefire because he doesn't think he can safely hold his May Day parade in Moscow without the Ukrainians not attacking him. So, in short, I think Putin's life at the moment is not great, and he probably has a whole lot of pressures bearing on him, and I think that's terrific. The only thing that would make things better is if the Ukrainians could do a multi-drone aerial display over Red Square on Victory Day with blue and yellow smoke coming out the back. I think that would be just wonderful. They don't need to be attack drones. They just need to do a ceremonial flyover.
Sounds like a very 2026 version of the Red Arrows, Mick. But I guess, what does this tell us about the state of modern warfare then? Ukraine arguably is one of the most important actors for Europe now, as Trump threatens NATO. Two-pronged question here. What do you think the Ukrainians can do to support Europe and its striving for strategic autonomy? But second to that, do you think the idea of NATO minus is possible? The idea that NATO could exist without the United States?
So the first question, what can Ukraine do? It's like, well, what has it been doing? Well, for 5 years, it's been absorbing Russian pressure that hasn't been directed at the rest of Europe. It has been learning and showing Europe what war in the 21st century is likely to be like. It has been the bulwark of democracies in Eastern Europe. And I think the Baltics, the Poles, the Scandinavians in particular realise that. I mean, even in the Cold War, Sweden and Finland didn't join NATO. They have now. They understand they're all in this together. Supporting Ukraine is important to them, but learning from Ukraine is just as important. So Ukraine provides a whole lot of things in learning about modern warfare, but also, I think importantly, learning about modern defence industry. Ukraine had a very robust defence industry during the Cold War. It was basically all gone by the mid-90s. It's rebuilt that from nothing, but in a 21st century version. And I think it's responsive, it's connected well to the military, still has its problems, but it's the kind of modern defence industry that middle powers, I think, should be aspiring to. The second question about NATO, I don't know whether the United States is leaving just yet. I mean, even the hottest of heads and anti-Europe zealots there see that America's security posture and alliance with European nations is of big benefit to America and the American people, if for no other reason, to make sure there's not a war on the European landmass that required America to expend so much blood and treasure in World War I and World War II. But just say there was an American drawdown, Europe would come up with different arrangements. I don't think it would be one mega alliance. I think it would be a moneyball approach. It would be a whole lot of different arrangements that would kind of replace the one big arrangement. So I think, the arrangements you're seeing among the Baltics and the Scandinavians at the moment in the East, that'll be a bloc. You'll see the Central Europeans kind of team up. You'll see those in the West who don't want to do much, like Spain and Portugal, and that kind of, do their thing. There'll be some loose kind of arrangement between them. The EU will probably have a part to play. England will sit off the coast and kind of contribute where it can and critique where it can't. So I don't think there is a NATO after NATO. I think it would be a moneyball approach of lots of smaller arrangements that would kind of cooperate.
But isn't this just a reflection of the nature of alliances today? A lot of emphasis is put on BRICS and the almighty new world order that is coming, right? But they've been rather quiet during the Iran war. Like NATO extended, the SEATO used to exist until 1977, if I remember correctly. So, minilateralism is where I'm going with this idea that you have smaller, more niche-focused entities. AUKUS is obviously a quintessential example of this. Do you think that some things like that would happen under the umbrella of NATO, but then so you're saying you could have minilateral groups within them that focus on their respective regional challenges?
Well, this is what you see in Asia. I mean, a lot of people say, why doesn't Asia have a NATO? And my response would be, why don't you be more like us? It's kind of hub and spoke, but not quite, because under hub and spoke, the hub has all the power and the spokes don't, and that's not the case out here. And what you're seeing is a framework of several key alliances. So you have a US-Japan alliance, you have a US-Australia alliance, you have a US-Philippine alliance, and then you have a whole lot of meshes off each of those arrangements. So the US-Australia one has, the Kiwis, PNG, Fiji, these kind of countries. You then have a very strong, almost alliance. It's in just about everything short of being called alliance between Australia and Japan, Australia and the Philippines. You have these very strong strategic partnerships with countries like Indonesia, Malaysia, Singapore, Thailand. So it's this mesh, and it doesn't need consensus for things to happen. It just means those who are going to do something need to agree with each other. So you see at the moment, for example, that Australia, the Philippines, Japan and America do a huge amount of stuff together. And every major exercise that's now conducted in Australia is Australia, Japan, America. Every single one. Army, Navy, Air Force joint. The same is happening in the Philippines. The same is happening in Japan. All the logistics and status of forces agreements are all being sorted out. So I think we have a better than NATO arrangement, but it still requires quite often the driving force of Indo-PACOM, and the commander there, Admiral Samuel Paparo, is a really energetic, engaging and charismatic leader who kind of wrangles a lot of these, provides a lot of support and encourages different countries to engage with each other.
But to use Ukraine as a case study, how much do you think middle powers can lead the way in an effective alternative to great power competition? Mark Carney, the leader of Canada, made in that notable speech in the World Economic Forum about more middle powers needing to collectively band together to offset or counterbalance a burden share, if you like, against the seemingly might is right approach that we seem to have returned to now with Trump, Xi, Putin. Well, okay, they're not working together per se, but how do you think more middle powers can approach this militarily and strategically?
I don't disagree with the substance of that Carney speech. It was a good speech, but you've got to back it up with action, right? means you've got to spend more on national security and foreign aid and diplomacy and stuff. That hasn't always happened when we see these great speeches at Davos and elsewhere. So, words have to be followed by action. And what we've seen since 1945 is generally when the Americans talk, it's followed by resourcing and action. Middle powers have to learn how to do exactly the same thing. We have to reduce our addiction to government payments and spend just a bit more, a bit more than 2% on national security and the range of things that would allow us to present a united front to deter the more overt and catastrophic forms of military aggression that we could imagine in the Pacific or Europe in the future. I mean, a global hegemon is a pretty recent thing. You've always had a balance of power in Europe. You had that for hundreds of years. Yes, in Asia, the Chinese might have been a kind of Middle Ages hegemon, but still middle power diplomacy has probably been far more common in history than hegemonic approaches. We just have to remember and go back to those approaches. And if it's more balance of power, so be it. I don't want to see a spheres of influence approach. I think that's awful because if you're in someone's sphere of influence and you don't want to be in it, what do? You can't tow your country away. But, I think middle power diplomacy, middle power is a really important idea, and we probably should invest more thinking and resourcing into that.
To cap off our conversation, very simply, what do you think victory looks like to Ukraine compared to, say, 22 or 2023? You sound very optimistic. And you think a lot could change in the next few months?
Well, I don't know whether this year is victory year, but victory looks like Ukraine remaining a sovereign, prosperous nation. Victory looks like a Russia that has decided that threatening Ukraine is too hard. Victory looks like Ukrainians who've been displaced overseas coming home. Victory looks like the return of the kidnapped children and trials of Russian war criminals. Ultimately, somewhere down the track, victory will look like the collapse of the Russian governance system and its realisation that it needs a more enlightened approach to governing its own people and relating to those around it. That's the long-term goal, but that would be part of an eventual Ukrainian victory, and this war will have helped bring that up around at some point.
What does that mean for Russia? You don't think it collapses, do you? You don't see it fragmenting into different splinters, and if it does, what does that mean for its military prowess and what remains of it, and any other countries that have their own interests? What precedent does that set?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting question. I mean, you could look at the end of the Cold War and go, well, were we too magnanimous with Russia? Did we not do enough to teach them that they actually lost? Did we treat them like co-victors of the Cold War? Whatever happens next time, I hope we don't do that. I think Russia needs to know it's lost and know its place in the world. Putin doesn't seem to understand that. All he's really got left is a whole lot of legacy Cold War nuclear weapons. That's the thing. That's the sort of Damocles he holds over the world. His military has performed abysmally in Ukraine. It has no prospect against a modern NATO force. His demography is awful. His economy is going out the back door. He has no allies. He has the Chinese who've basically bought him. It's pretty hard to see a bright future for Russia. It's pretty hard to see an even average future for it.
Yeah, it pains me to say that, having grown up there a little bit, but it certainly isn't looking very positive. What would you encourage people to look out for in the time between now and when we next have you on, maybe in a few weeks, from a military standpoint? Be the war in Iran, be the war in Ukraine, what's the single thing?
You've got to track all of them. You can never take your eye off them. You can never focus on one because you miss stuff. So, I look at Ukraine, I look at what Israel's doing in Gaza and Lebanon. I obviously look at the Iran war, and I look at what's happening across the Western Pacific. And, from that, I kind of get a loose sense of how war as a phenomena is evolving and developing, how countries are responding to that. And then there's a layer of technological change that's kind of common or similar in all those theatres that you have to track. And I think for me, the most profound one at the moment is AI. It is moving at a speed that no other technology in history has moved. I mean, if you have a 3-month-old LLM, that's the same as having a 40-year-old motor car. That's how fast the state of the art is moving in AI, and it is penetrating deeply into military institutions and military affairs. And what it looks like now will be very different even in a month.
Rod. Well, that's a cheery sentiment, reassuring sentiment on General Mick Ryan. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for joining, being so generous with your time, everyone, for watching. Well, we touched upon NATO, and we've got General Wesley Clark, former military NATO commander during the Kosovo War, coming on, I think, in a couple of days. So I'm going to ask him some of what Mick said and see how he agrees. But cheeky little teaser there. Everyone, very much for watching. Do like, subscribe, and of course, check out Mick's work. Not that you don't. Not that you need to. I think you know he does already. But we'll see you all next time. Take care.